Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. Our guest today is Cornell Thomas, and we are going to talk about so much good stuff. He's an international speaker and author. I'm excited to share him with you. He's got great energy. It's going to be a great conversation. Welcome to the show, Cornell.
Thank you so much for having me, Alicia.
Now, whenever I have speakers on, it's always a really high energy conversation. Always, every time. Yeah. I love my speaker guests.
We bring it. It's hard to meet a speaker that doesn't bring it, but speakers usually bring it.
Most definitely. That's been my experience. On rare occasion, there will be somebody who's got kind of a different vibe. Their messaging maybe is a little bit different. But you can always tell who really has been doing their mindset work. Yep. Because there's a whole different level that you just exude.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so it's funny because I've traveled all over the world. I've spoken all different places, and that's the one thing that connects every human being I've ever met, regardless of country, is we've all been through stuff, and we can all make our mindset stronger, better. Right? It's just like any other muscle. Right? We can always work on. I've never met someone that said, I have a perfect mindset. Right? We all go through stuff. I think that's the big connector of humanity.
That's a perfect segue to talking a little bit more about your business and what you do, because I want our listeners to get a sense of who is this guy that we're going to be listening to for the next 20 or so minutes. So talk to us a little bit about what you're doing in the world.
Yeah. Well, I'm an international speaker, author, and corporate trainer. I started speaking professionally, and I say that's just when I started getting money 9 years ago. The first year I spoke, it was high fives and hugs, and I was just getting my reps in. I have a basketball background. I was a basketball player, got a contract to play professional basketball, and ruptured my Achilles tendon a week before I was supposed to go. So that was, thank God I was raised through adversity. My father was passed away when I was 4 years old. He's a police officer in the city of Passaic, New Jersey. And my mom raised 5 of us by herself with no money. So we were talking about backgrounds before we, started recording. And for me, all of that struggle, all of that adversity helped me get through future adversities because I had something to look back on. Hey, you've been through this. So the next thing that's coming up, that that you can handle it. So when I started speaking, I was coaching and my son was about to be born. And I realized that if I coached at a big college, I would never see him. And growing up without a father, that didn't make sense to me. How could I not be in this child's life growing up the way I did? So I didn't know what it was going to be. And to be honest with you, Alicia, people were like, oh, how'd you get into speaking? Did you go to so-and-so's coaching program? I said, no, on Facebook. I was on Facebook one day. It was super negative. I took a quote from a book of positive quotes. The book was actually called The Book of Positive Quotes. Took a quote, put it on Facebook. People liked it. So I was like, okay, so people can reset themselves every morning by seeing a positive quote. And then after a couple of months, one day I woke up and I couldn't find the book and I wrote my own quote. And people still liked it. So I'm like, well, screw the book. I'm going to write my own quote. So I started writing my own quotes. And then someone said, Cornell, you should write a blog. I said, that's a great idea. What the hell is a blog? I was like, is that a new disease? And so my friend Stephanie literally we were in Panera Bread in Rockaway, opened up her computer. We started a WordPress site on right there. And I called the blog The Power of Positivity. And every Saturday I read a blog and do a blog entry. And I started seeing the analytics and people from Vietnam and Germany and all these different places that I've never been before in my life started to look at the blog. So I said, all right, well, I'm gonna write a book. So I Googled, how do you write a book? And I published my first book. It was called The Power of Positivity, Controlling Where the Ball Bounces. And after that, I said, well, I want to share my story. And for anybody out there that has a story inside of them that's like, man, who's going to want to listen, blah, 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 blah. All those concerns I had. There's not one speaker alive that's honest that would tell you they didn't have those same concerns. But I realized once I started speaking that there's always someone, regardless of what audience, one person, 1,000, it doesn't matter. There's always someone that has come up to me and said, thank you. I can really relate to what you just said.
It's powerful. A lot of people, many of which who are listening, are comparing their life to other people's lives. when they see someone who's had it harder, they feel guilty because they didn't have it as hard. Mm-hmm. When they see someone who has it easier, they feel defective or disadvantaged in some way because of the way that influenced them, how it conditioned them. And when someone is starting a business, and I know we're gonna get on this topic, so this is a perfect I think lead into this. You have this desire. I love to say, you know, when we have a desire in our heart, that's like a divine thing. That's not just, you know, I want $1 million so that I can, you know, rub someone's nose in it. That's an ego desire, right? We're talking about like the heart's desire. You want a better life, but you still have all of that maybe less than ideal conditioning. And that is really sad because so many incredible people who are being called to do meaningful work in the world and make a positive difference are getting tripped up by all of that crap. And so it takes a lot of courage to just get started.
Yeah.
And then when you actually start to bump up against how challenging not just building a business is, but all of your mental and emotional baggage.
Yeah.
It is incredibly discouraging for most people. And then once we're in that mindset, now the comparison meter is like on high. Yeah. And you're just, you know, sorry, this is not going to be necessarily a PG-13 episode, but that's what I call your mental fuckery. You know, that's like all of the stuff that just, it's dragging you down. It's slowing you down. It's creating so much additional unnecessary pain and struggle and suffering. And then you're looking for solutions. You're looking for the guru who's got the thing that is going to help you to finally be successful. And so everyone's looking for the Band-Aid that's going to magically heal this big gaping wound. Mm-hmm. And when they're trying all the stuff and that stuff's not fixing the problem, it further compounds that feeling that there's something wrong with me. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. Let's talk about this from your perspective, because you've personally overcome a lot of this stuff, and we're all still working through it. Yeah. But you're also helping other people to bridge that gap between the mental fuckery, if you will, and reality and what's really possible for us. And so much more is possible. So I'd love to hand this off to you. And I'd love for you to talk from your perspective about what does it really take?
Yeah, you touched on so many beautiful things. Again, I told you before we started recording, I was like, Leisha, I need to learn more of your story because I knew there's so many layers. So one of the things that you said that's very important is comparison is a killer. And everybody needs to understand that. Comparison is a killer. My last book that came out was called Game of Death, an entrepreneur survivor guide. And I had a chapter called a killer named comparison, because we look at things that are not real. We look on social media with all the filters and all the bullshit, and we're like, wow, why is my business not doing that? Not knowing that the person you're looking at doesn't even have a successful business or a business at all. Everything is filtered. We're in a filtered society. And no one goes on social media and goes, got diarrhea today. It's amazing, right? Like no one's telling you the bad shit. Like everybody's telling you the great things. And what you have to understand is that if you compare yourself to someone's highlight reel, you're always going to be disappointed. Always. That's the first thing. When it comes to getting started, I was listening to Les Brown a long time ago, and he said a quote that I love. He said, you don't have to be great to get started, but you have to get started to be great. You cannot compare your start to someone else's middle or to someone else's end. If I started speaking and said, well, you know what, I'm not getting $200,000 a speech like Les Brown, like, what am I doing? I must suck. Then I wouldn't be speaking. We wouldn't be having this conversation. So I got to compare myself to me. And if you're not in tune with yourself, if you're not in tune with your journey or your purpose, you can't do that, right? Like you're always going to be looking for someone else to validate you. Validate your damn self. And you validate yourself by saying, where am I today? Where am I on this day? And then next week, where am I now? And where am I next month, in 3 months, in 4 months, in a year? And you track your journey. And it's not saying you don't go out and you don't get advice from Alicia Kramer, or you don't get advice from other people. That's one thing. But I'm not comparing myself to any of these freaking jokers. I'm sorry, no offense. But God created one me. And that's the dope thing about being alive. There's one of you. It will never be replicated again. And I tell human beings this all the time. If you had one Picasso, what in the world is that freaking thing worth? That is priceless. There's no price tag to it. It's the same thing with yourself. We devalue ourselves by comparing ourselves to other people. And when I first started my business, my first business was a basketball business. And I thought, because I'm Cornell Thomas, got a contract to play professional basketball, I'll open the doors and everybody will be there, because all these other dudes that are running camps and clinics are successful and they don't have half my background. So this is going to be easy. So I hire 5 counselors. I buy 1,000 t-shirts for the summer. And Alicia, I had more counselors than campers my first week. I had 3 kids. One of them, I was driving a half hour just to come to camp. I had 5 counselors that I said I was going to pay. And I had 1,000 t-shirts. It took me 8 years to get rid of that last t-shirt, right? So I tell people, you've got to do the work, but you have to do the inner work first. You have to go into yourself and say, okay, why am I doing this? Like, I know why I'm speaking. Every day it's validated. I know why I'm doing what I do. I know when I go into corporations and talk about team and culture and together, we use the word Ubuntu, which is a South African word, which means I am because we are. I know when I go into it, I know why I'm supposed to be there. A lot of people open businesses not having the why to it, right? Like, well, I'm just going to open this up. Well, why? Oh, I don't freaking know. Well, that shit's not going to last too long, bro. Right? So when I hear you talk like this, it's so important for your listeners and people to understand the nuggets that you're dropping right now. Because if you're going to compare yourself in business, out of business, at all in life, you're going to waste so much time out of your life that you can't get back trying to be someone that you're not.
Let's layer on this, because that's obviously a huge issue that we just talked about, but it's certainly not the only one. And this is not a conversation that's intended to be like a Debbie Downer conversation. To the contrary, this is, let's just look at this honestly and objectively, so that it's not the big scary monster. It's not the boogeyman in the closet that is always ready to, suck the soul out of you, right? When we look at these things objectively, we take the superstition out of it. And I think that is really empowering, because now I can say, okay, you know what? It is what it is. Some of this stuff is not ideal. Where I've put myself, maybe mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever the situation may be, doesn't mean this is the end of the game. Mm-hmm. So now, when someone is doing their inner work and they're growing their business, the inner work doesn't end. And that's something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast. This is something that I am out there talking about all the time. When I'm interviewed on podcasts, when I'm working with my clients, it's not sexy, because marketing is all about, well, look at what I can do for you. Look at what this magic method that I stumbled across that was, rained down from heaven, and I have the key to your everlasting success. That's sexy. Everybody wants that. I want the coach that can give me that. I want the program that's going to promise that end result for me. Mm-hmm. But in reality, the inner work is ongoing work. And that means you're going to bump up against old triggers. You're going to do something new, and it's not going to go the way that you wanted it to go. Doesn't mean that it has a negative, unhappy ending, as long as you're willing to sort of tweak, refine, pivot. Sometimes we just make stupid decisions in our businesses. Sometimes it's uninformed. Sometimes we need to learn something new. Sometimes we did it for the wrong reason. Mm-hmm. Maybe your ego was saying, do this, and your inner guidance was saying, don't do this. So when someone is going through life and business, what do you feel from your experience is some really, really fundamental guidance to stay on path? And when they veer off the path, to get back on the path?
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing is allow yourself to fail. Like, it's okay. We are our biggest critics. We are our biggest cynics. We destroy ourselves. And I can just use the analogy for basketball. I used to, when I talk to parents, I used to say, well, your 12-year-old, their inner dialogue is worse than anything that you can be saying to them in the car ride home, which is making them hate basketball, right? I've already told them something. Their teammates have talked to them, but they have an inner dialogue that they're beating themselves up. So you bring them in the car and you say negative things. By the time the kid gets home, basketball now becomes a horrible experience. You don't want to be trapped in your business where it's a horrible experience because you're beating yourself up. It is okay to fail. I don't know why, for whatever reason, in this freaking everybody gets a freaking trophy society we live in now. I don't know why people have said failure is a bad thing. Any success through the history of successes in our as humans has had failures. Anything you want to name, anything, the light bulb, the plane, the car, like everything has failure. So one, allow yourself to fail. Two, ask important, real questions. Why is it failing? Sometimes, and a lot of times, most times in my occasion, it is you, right? It's not your history, right? It's not like someone doesn't like you or people want to see you fail. No one gives a shit about you failing. No, like there's news cycles, 7,000 stories every single day. No one cares about Peter Smith's freaking, popcorn business, right? Like no one cares about that shit, right? It's usually you. So if you look in the mirror and ask some real deep questions like, well, why is it failing? Like what block do I have up for myself? We were talking before. I was talking about delegating, right? That's been a little bit of a block for me where I'm like, I can't, I'm like, oh, I can't find the person. Dude, there's 8 billion people on the planet and growing. Their person is out there. You just got to do more work and be more trusting, right? So like, it's things like that where I allow myself when I make a mistake or if I have a failure where I embrace it. I'm like, okay, well, that sucked. Now what am I going to do? The word you use, which I love, is pivot. I have t-shirts, pivot or perish, right? Like either you're going to pivot and start finding solutions or you're going to lay in the problem. So that's what I would say is one, allow yourself to fail. Two, ask real questions. And three, if it gets to the point where say you cannot figure it out, find someone like Alicia, find people that are doing this work. And it's okay to have a teammate, right? It's okay to say like, hey, Alicia, you know what? I can't figure this out. Like, can you come at me? But find the right one. Don't find someone that's going to freaking poo-poo. Oh, it's okay. Like, you'll be fine. No, have someone be like, hey, jackass. Like, obviously you should be doing this, right? Like all my whole circle is real as shit. Like my circle is real. Like if I'm like, hey man, what? They're like, dummy. Like obviously you could be doing. I'm like, okay, thank you, I appreciate it, and it wakes you up a little bit. So have a real circle that will check you and without you getting butthurt.
Yes. I just had a session this morning with a client and I love her. I love her. She's the only client that has called me out on my potty mouth. And she did it so elegantly. She said, I'm sensitive to language. So I've toned it down for her. I have. Yeah. But the one thing that I will not tone down is love, which is me being authentic and real. And you can guide someone to the awareness in a way that is not necessarily hurtful, right? Yeah. But the fact is that we do need people to call us out on our own bullshit. Yep. Because when you're triggered and you're stuck in your story, you're stuck in your story. And you might even realize to some extent that you're being irrational, that you're just being stupid about it. Right? Like you called yourself out. You're like, yeah, I see, this has got to work on this. Yeah. But sometimes we can't do that for ourselves because we're stuck in the problem and we can't solve the problem when we're stuck in the problem.
Yeah.
Now, when we're talking about all this stuff, it does sound a little negative. It does sound a little pessimistic, but the reality is we really can create amazing lives for ourselves. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be rainbows and butterflies. Now, this is really important because sometimes when people are looking at all the mindset stuff, all that mental fuckery, they start to feel a little hopeless, especially when they're doing their inner work and they're still bumping up against stuff. But now you're always going to be bumping up against stuff. That doesn't mean you can't have an amazing life and a successful business. Doesn't matter where you came from. So let's share a little bit of that happy, positive stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're out there and you've had your own journey. You've had your setbacks. And maybe your life isn't everything that you know it can be, but you're creating more and more and more of that awesomeness. So how much better is your life today than it was 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's not even a comparison. And what people don't understand is, like, some people might think of that talk as negative. I think of it as positive, because we have a messed up misconception of what positivity means. Positivity is not smiling and being, happy all the time. That's not positivity. That's stupidity. I don't know one person on the planet that ever told me, hi. Like, I don't know anybody like that, because life is life, and life is going to punch you in the mouth. Positivity is not the absence of human emotions. To me, it's just not living in negative emotions. I'm allowed to have human moments. I'm allowed. You're allowed, because that's our human condition. God wouldn't create us the way we are for us not to have emotions. We'd be robots, right? So my life is so much better. And I tell people, I go through stuff every single day. Like, I can pick any morning of the day, and if I want to fixate on a problem, I can fixate on the problem. But I don't, because I'm aware that we have a finite amount of time on this earth. So I don't fixate on negativity. I'm 99.9% positive. And it just, there's some days, some moments that I'm going to have, and I allow myself to have them. I don't fake it. Like, no, everything's good. My dog just died. It's okay. Like, no, man, like, let that shit out. Like, it's okay. So my life, I never would have dreamed when I first started speaking that I'd be in Saudi Arabia and Dubai and Africa, and people be paying me to have conversations. Never. And if you would have came to me 10 years ago, Alicia, and said, Cornell, this is what you're going to be doing in 10 years, I would have thought that maybe you were on some type of crack. I'm like, there's no way. There's like, what are you, nuts? I'm going to be a basketball coach. So for me to be able to do this and see things that I never could have imagined seeing not just as a child, as an adult, because my mind wasn't open to travel or open to seeing the world. It's amazing. So I thank God every single day, like every second that I have, where I can meet amazing people like you and just travel and not have a boss. Like you said to me, before we started recording that, you never wanted a boss. I knew I didn't want a boss when I was in 6th grade. And I knew that because I asked my mom if we could order pizza. And my mom said, she just gave me the look, which means no, don't ask again. That's all she needs to do is give me that look. Me and my 5 siblings, we know, like, okay, that means don't ask again. And my mom was part of this group called Weight Watchers, and they had these cookies that tasted like death, right? Like, there's 5 of us in the house. None of the kids ate the cookies. That's how bad they were. Chocolate chip cookies, death cookies. And so my mom said, give me the look. I asked my mom if I can have the cookies, the packages of cookies. And she said, okay, baby boy, you can have them. She's like, don't eat them. Don't eat all of them. I'm thinking to myself, like, you don't have to worry about that shit. I'm not going to eat any of them. And so I went to my closet. I got out my baseball uniform, and I sold every single one of those cookies to my neighbor, those death cookies. So I went house to house and sold 100 packs of cookies for 50 cents. I made $50. Now in 6th grade, that's about $500,000. And so I came home, and my mom was on the porch, and I had an empty box. I thought she was going to just like rip into me. And she said, what'd you do with the cookies? And I said, Mommy, I sold them. And I put my hand out to give her the $50. And she pushed my hand back, and she started laughing. And she kissed me on the forehead, and she goes, I don't worry about you. Right. And it's like, that was such a stamp. Like, you can create your own money. You have your mom's backing that you're thinking outside of the box. She knew I was going to buy pizzas for the whole family. once I had the money, she knew where my heart was. And I always think if she would have crushed that dream right there, like took the money, said, give it back, blah, 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 maybe I wouldn't want to be an entrepreneur. But once I knew I can create wealth, right, on my own, just by thinking, I was like, why would I ever work for somebody? That doesn't make any sense at all. So I just, that story, I tell my mom, I said, Mom, I'll never forget all the things that you've taught me. I said, that's the one thing that I'll just never forget for the rest of my life.
I love it. And I love when we are able to just talk real about what's possible. Mm. I've found that, and this is partially from my own journey, but I've seen it over the many years, not just with clients, but with colleagues, just with people in general, is so many people have repressed themselves and their ability to dream that life can be good for them. They've just sort of accepted, oh, this is just the way it's going to be for me. I'm always going to be at this level. I'm always going to have this problem. And it's self-imposed. Doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to be easy for you to break through a lot of that old conditioning, but it is possible, and it's so incredibly worth it. Mm-hmm. And this is the kind of stuff that's possible, is just following your dream, not being necessarily a international speaker, right? Mm-hmm. That's your dream. That's your passion. But everyone listening has their own dream, their own version of what a successful, happy life is. And it is freaking possible. It is absolutely 100% possible. You made a comment that, 10 years ago, if I would have said you were doing this, you would have been like, you're on drugs.
Yeah.
Right. And I've made similar statements to people. Like, if somebody told me 20 years ago that I would be where I am, I'd probably like laugh in their face and then go cry myself to sleep. Yeah. And that's so telling. Like, literally, it doesn't matter like what dumb shit you've done in your past, what kind of asshole you've been, like, you can change. Yeah. And I love to have conversations with people like you that are doing freaking awesome things. And so let's tell our listeners how they can connect with you.
Yeah. Well, Instagram, it's at Cornell Thomas 34, through all social medias, TikTok, Facebook, etc. And then my website is cornellthomas.com. And that you'll see all information like where I'm going next. We have a positivity summit at the end of this month in New Jersey, July 29th. We've done one in New Jersey, New York, LA, England. Now that I have a new sister out in Arizona, we have to definitely do one in Arizona and get Alicia to speak out there. And I also run a speakers course called Get in the Game. And I don't promise gigs or like you'll be the next Tony Robbins. I just want you to find your voice and be comfortable sharing your story. So a lot of stuff all on my website. When people follow me on Instagram, I always follow them back right away because I love collecting amazing people all over the planet. So that's where you can contact me.
So good. So you gotta just connect with this guy. He's too good. He's too good not to. Follow him around. I want to thank you so much, Cornell, for being with us and sharing your awesomeness. It has been so fun.
Thank you so much for having me. You are amazing.
Thank you, of course, to all of our listeners as well. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.